Mr. Milling, would you like to comment on what you think the real meaning of the the recent explosion in Oklahoma, and where is the real enemy?
Where's the real
Enemy.
criminal?
Enemy.
Enemy.
Turn the mic off, please.
I don't want to pontificate on it because it was such a desperately bad event that it's too easy to talk about who the real enemy might be. But I think one element of Oklahoma City is a reflection of what I was talking about earlier, that as technology grows, so will terrorism. And the reason is that the methods and modes that are used in technology accelerate and develop. This is not my idea, you can find it in any newspaper. Accelerate and develop the powers of terrorists. Parenthetically, one of the reasons the Soviet Union got Gorbachev and Glasnost is they realized at a certain point that what with the fax machine coming and the info highway and all those and computers, that they were lost against the United States unless they opened up. They couldn't control information any longer, because if they did, they'd be so backward to the United States that they had to open up and take their chances. Well, the problem is that the Cold War, if you ask me who the villain is, I'll say it was the Cold War. Because the Cold War was a tragic comedy. It was a fraud. We did not want to destroy the Soviet Union and rule the world. As Americans, we all know that was not our desire. We feared that the Soviet Union desired to destroy us and rule the world. Well, I think the Soviet Union had lost its idea that it could conquer the world certainly by 1970, and probably earlier. Probably after the confrontation over Cuba. It's reported that Khrushchev once said to his people, when they said to him, look, the Americans have 4 times as many nuclear weapons as we do. We've got to catch up. And he said, that's nonsense. With the 1/4 we have, we can destroy them. So they're not going to start a war. And why should we waste our economy on trying to keep up? And that, a lot of people believe, is why he ultimately was thrown out. Because the powers that be in the Soviet Union wanted to get into an arms race with the United States. We wanted that arms race because we knew it was the way to defeat the Soviets, which is to grind their economy to powder. We didn't win the Cold War. We bankrupted the Soviet Union. And now we're paying the price because we discovered that it wasn't the evil empire. We discovered that the Pied Piper, Ronald Reagan, had taken us down the wrong path for 8 years. And George Bush the Piper had danced along behind him for another 4. And that what it was, it had been a huge swindle if you stop to think of how much we wasted in our economy, and the fact that we destroyed a rather dull, oppressive society that functioned at least, and that was looking to get better. There were a great many people in Russia who wanted freedom and who wanted more expression, and they would have come to that if we'd been able to make peace as we should have back in '72. Then, and ironically, it was Nixon who wanted to make the peace because he wanted to become immortal as a great president. If he made the peace with China and with the Soviet Union in '72, what would have happened is very slowly freedoms would have opened in the Soviet Union, and you would have had a more stable country now and less chaos. But all we did is we kept the Cold War going because it kept the country in place. We were like a field of magnetic filings, all pointing in the same direction. And when the Cold War was over, it was like the filings turned in every direction. And all the hatred that had been channeled for the Soviet Union for all those years was now rife among us. And everybody in America was starting to hate everyone else. And we have a kind of emotional chaos in this country now. And on that, terrorism has fed. And terrorism of the sort that we saw in Oklahoma City is absolutely off our register. We can understand, if we use our imagination, we can understand one person killing another person. We can understand people destroying each other en masse in wartime. But to have this kind of indiscriminate destruction, where you're blowing up a building that could conceivably have your best friend in the building at the time, when you're just killing for the sake of demoralizing a society, then we can recognize that we've come into terribly dangerous and bad times. And on top of it, we have to recognize, we do well to recognize that the safety net that we had in this country for a long time, under Democrats and Republicans alike, which is that to some extent, we did provide for the sick and the homeless and the poor, and we wanted blacks and whites to come together. Why? Because that was our propaganda war with the Soviet Union. We didn't want to open the door to them. They're saying, see, they have unemployed in America, they have homeless in America, they have black and white rivalry, animosity. So we worked at it. The moment the Cold War ended, if you start to look at it, we stopped being interested in the homeless, the poor, and in black and white relations. And everything's gotten worse here since the Cold War ended. And the reason is that we built our understanding of the world on false premises for those 40 years, those 50 years. Maybe there was a function in the Cold War immediately after the Second World War, because Stalin was near insane. But I think even there, I don't pretend to know enough history to know what the rights and wrongs were in the Cold War for the first 10 or 20 years. But there's very little doubt in my mind that that war went on 20 to 30 years too long. On that cheerful note, why don't we start signing books?
Will the staff please step forward?